Hey everyone, I just wanted to take a few minutes to go back over the lesson plan so you can just get a recap of what is expected for your assignment this week. As a reminder, you should have already submitted your demo rough draft. We did that in class on Tuesday, and then you're working on your final draft for this weekend due Sunday by midnight. So we're only doing sections 1, 2, and 4. You will do well, you won't do, like I said, you won't do the context for learning. You'll fill out this top part up here. I hope you can see my cursor. I'll highlight it. So you're filling out that information and you're skipping context for learning. This area right here, you're skipping. Let me see if I can highlight. There we go. Skipping the yellow, you're completing the green. Let's do that. All right, so this is another chunk that you're completing because we are doing section 1, 2, and 4, like I said. That section 1 says central focus. And so it says a central focus is an understanding that you want your students to develop in the learning segment. It's a description of the important identifiable theme, essential question, or topic within the curriculum that is the purpose of the instruction of the learning segment. Think about when I taught the demo lesson. What was the central focus? What would be like the essential question that you're asking? I can't tell you what to put here because I'm trying to see what you will put in your own words. So I can't tell you exactly what to put. But let's think if I were to teach a lesson on two-step equations. I feel like I use that example a lot, but if I did a lesson on two-step equations, I may say, how can we use two-step equations to solve real-world situations? So that's more of like a word problem application. But anyways, that would be my essential question. I may also say, how can I find two-step equations by using the 4 main operations of math: addition, subtraction, multiplication, division? Okay, so that's just an idea. You're not writing that because our lesson was not on two-step equations, but you are writing some similar example, essential question here regarding the lesson that I taught in class, the remove one. Content standards, this comes from the course of study. We talked about that a good bit in class. I had several people message me like the structure of how you can write this. There's different ways. I told y'all there's not like a right and a wrong per se. There's a lot of options, but it should be something that the reader can look at your lesson plan and immediately know what lesson standard you're teaching. Okay, so I typically say ALCOS for Alabama Course of Study dot MA if it's math, SCI if it's science. And then let's say that I was teaching 8th grade standard 13. I might put that. Okay. So that's the first number is the grade. The second is the standard. If I was teaching geometry, I might say Geo standard 22 or something. But it needs to be obvious what standard you're doing. When you're writing your lesson plan, you also need to write the words that go with your standard. So that just means like in your course of study book or digitally, if you prefer to do digital, you need to actually type out what that standard is. Okay. Don't just put ALCOS.MA.8.13. Put what that standard 13 says. Next, it says student learning objectives written using Bloom's verbs. Talked a lot about this in class on Tuesday. The Bloom's verbs were those hierarchy of verbs. Remember, we typically want the top 4 levels, and it would be written in the format student will be able to, so SWABAT or whatever you want to call it. Student will be able to blank, insert the verb. There's a whole structure for this on your notes. And then so they will be able to blank, whatever. Okay. Again, I cannot tell you what to write because I want to see if you know what to write. But if I were doing two-step equations, I would say students will be able to identify the variable or maybe let's say students will be able to isolate the variable and solve a two-step equation using the 4 operations: addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. I don't have the Bloom's verbs right in front of me, but you have a whole cheat sheet for that. So use those good higher level verbs. Remember, top 4 categories is where we're shooting at. The bottom two are good verbs, but they're typically like recall and definitions. They're not the higher level of learning, so we want those higher level verbs. Next, section 2, preparation, theoretical principles and research-based best practices. Why are the learning tasks for this lesson appropriate for your students? I think your lesson plan template actually has that on it. This one, for some reason, doesn't, but yours says, why are the learning tasks for the lesson appropriate for your students? We could say something along the lines are, the learning tasks are appropriate for my students because they blank. What do they do? Do they reach students at all levels? Do they help introduce the concept with hands-on activities so that the students can get comfortable with it and then apply? Do they think about like we talked about sample space, how did that help them? How did that benefit them? And then ultimately, how did they use the information from the sample space to determine which sums would be rolled more often, knowing which ones to pick? You know what I mean? Again, I can't tell you exactly what to write because that's like your assignment is to figure out what you're writing right there. Let me mark that in green. So we're doing this whole section too. Content knowledge, background knowledge, what do the students need to already know to be able to meet the expectations of the standards objectives? We talked about this 2 or 3 different times for our specific assignment. But as an example, if I were doing a lesson on 2-step equations, I might say background knowledge. Students need to know how to solve a 1-step equation. Students need to know how to divide using a fraction instead of just a quotient symbol, because that's how we notate that in 2-step equations. We notate division with fractions. I might say students need to be comfortable with all 4 operations using rational numbers, because what if my 2-step equations have fractions and decimals? So you're just specifically saying what do they need to know? Like, what's a prereq here? What do they need to know before they can do this lesson? Materials and resources, that's what do we use? So any tangible, meaning like any actual manipulatives you had, in addition to like your pencil. Okay, we had notes. Think about what we would have printed out, stuff like that. Use of technology. So think about, what did the instructor use? What did the students use? Okay, and that's this little section. We're skipping 3. We're going to go into more detail on that on Tuesday. And then the last one is section 4. You're filling out this. So you would say, as a whole class, what did the whole class do as part of that lesson? So whole class means everybody in the class. We did it together. What did we do together? There were several times I kind of stopped independent work to go over things as a whole class. You could even say whole class, we did discussion. We discussed outcomes. We discussed our findings or our results. Okay, you're going to need to put it in sentence form, because these type of lesson plans, it's all about justifying your decisions, not just what you did, but why you chose to do it and how it benefited your learning. So, and I know you're still early on in your program, but you've got to get used to being wordy. And a lot of math and science people don't like to be wordy, but that's what they're asking here. So whole class, what did you do? Groups of students with similar needs. And we didn't really have groups of students with similar needs because I taught this to y'all as a group of college students. But you can think in your head, okay, and we've talked about this in class. If I had students who had a hard time, let's say, keeping up with everybody. So maybe they have a hard time staying on pace, or they have a hard time taking notes. One example, and I'll just tell you because I've said it so many times, I may provide them with a printed sample space. That way they are able to still complete the lesson. They're able to gain understanding of what that sample space represents. I may give them highlighters so they can kind of highlight the sums instead of having to write them out and fill them out themselves. So these are just different things I could do with groups of students with similar needs. Individual students, so this means like individually, what did I have students do? Okay. And then students with IEPs or 504 plans, this is what I told y'all, we've not talked in depth about that. You'll go over that way more in your next semester program. I'll kind of touch on it through this semester to give you ideas, but we're not going to go as in depth as you will in future classes. But this, you could Google this and say, what are common accommodations for students with IEPs or 504 in math class or in science class? If it says that they get a copy of printed notes, that could be something you put here. If I had students with IEPs or 504, I would provide them a printed copy of the notes. Or maybe it'll say they need additional time to complete the task. So you would say, I would provide them with additional time to complete the task per their IEP or 504. I'm trying to think of other ones. If they had an IELP, so that means that they are an English language learner, you may provide them with a translated copy of the notes. You don't have to list everything you find. I just want you to be thinking and understanding that not every student in your class is going to have the same level of learning and the same need. And so you're going to have to pivot for those students and do things a little differently. Okay, so I'd say maybe 2 or 3 examples here and you're good. Last thing that we're doing is student interactions. How will you structure opportunities for students to work with partners and or in groups? What criteria will you use when forming groups? When I formed y'all into groups, think about what did I do? I just put you in groups with your cable partner. That's the easiest thing to do. But as a teacher, you may say, okay, whole group, we're gonna start the discussion whole group. They're gonna do the activity independently for the first time. That's kind of what we did, right? And then I'm gonna partner them in groups of 2 by counting off. So like 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever, counting to 10 twice. And so then the 1 will pair with the 1, 2 with the 2, 3 with the 3. I also gave you an idea of like you could say I would use wheel of names to partner them. However you want to partner them. Again, this little demo lesson 0, it's supposed to just kind of get your feet wet. So you're like, okay, I kind of see what a lesson plan is. We're going to go more in depth, like I said, on section 3 and 5 and 6 next week. But right now, I just want you thinking about all of these aspects, okay? And obviously putting information down here. Remember, more justification and reasoning, the better. If you have questions, feel free to reach out. This is due Sunday by midnight. Okay, that gives me time to give feedback before class starts. I hope you'll have a great weekend. Goodbye.